Hello, students. This is Dr. Annette Feravich. We are in the critical thinking classroom. And it is April 11th. How can it be April 11th? We are here on day 13. Day 13. How can it be April 11th? I don't even know. So, what are we talking about today? Let me get my bearings about me because why? Because I still haven't gotten my coffee yet, which is sitting over there, and I'm going to take a minute to get my coffee. But I actually do like the new schedule because I get done a lot earlier than I was with the old new schedule. And but that gives me only 15 minutes in between classes for this class and the last class. Bookless Classroom is they're all so good. Classrooms are really good. I'm sorry. Let me take a moment while I just give myself a big hug for these classrooms. I love them. I'm a teacher. And this is what happens when you love your work. That's what we talked about in an early bird classroom and what a benefit it is to love your work. And I love teaching. I love the fact that God made me to be a teacher. I do. Okay. So what are we talking about? I don't know. Yes, I do. Of course I do. Because I worked on it last night until the wee hours of the morning, literally the wee hours of the morning. And we're still talking about self-esteem because as much as we got to those two slides and talked about the two epidemics facing the United States, and this is from Seligman in 1998. I thought I said 1997 before. I think it was 1998 actually, right? 1998 APA speech that's the American Psychological Association, to at their national conference as the president, right? And his speech was what he was going to take care of as president, right? What the focus needed to be for psychology here in the United States. And this is in his speech when he presents his theory on self-esteem, which is what we're talking about. His theory. And so, like I said, you can look up his speech and get the information from his speech if you want. But this is his theory from 1998. And remember, because I think that this is very interesting as well. Remember that this is based on our very first mass school shooting. I don't know. I'm sure it's the very first mass school shooting, that there were other shootings at schools, but this was the first mass shooting. There was also that terrorist attack in Oklahoma City by Timothy McVeigh, which really seems like, how could he have been the only one? Maybe not. Maybe he could have. Yeah, he could have. He could have. I don't know. Yes, and so in the Bookless Classroom, we're talking about our word and how much our word really means. So that's what we're talking about in our Bookless Classroom, and that's related here because if we will lose the outcomes or the consequences of building these good qualities. We will lose the rewards, the outcomes, the consequences, right? There's consequences to our bad behavior, but there's also consequences to our good behaviors. And we will lose the rewards of our good behavior if we don't understand where those rewards are coming from. They're coming from good behavior, number one. And number two, if we don't understand how to behave in those ways, right? We might throw a dart because we're not an expert and say we have to increase somebody's self-esteem. And then somebody's over here going, yeah, you know what happened in my life? I saw that my son was really good at playing sports and everybody got the same equal praise. Everybody got a ribbon. And so here are two ways that the American public is understanding this concept of self-esteem, as it's very, very necessary. But if you don't get it, if it's not earned, it's not self-esteem. You've maybe earned narcissism or pride or a lot of other, you could, by extension, a lot of other negative consequences, right? if you don't develop these positive traits. And I've known this for a very long time, that we have to develop these positive traits. It's what I taught a long time ago in elementary school, that we have to develop these positive traits. And the other thing I know is this, is that maybe you don't know whether or not a person is good or bad. Maybe it's hard for you to discern if a person is good or bad for you, right? Well, by seeing the consequences that person has in their life for their choices, right? You will be able to decide whether or not that person is good or bad for you, right? And again, we should be working towards positive rewards, of course. But in our philosophical class, we were talking about, in this book, On Disobedience from Erich Fromm, we were talking about we can feel fulfilled in constructive ways or destructive ways. But in the end, if we get fulfilled in destructive ways, like we were talking in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, focusing on those bottom two levels, if they're still fulfilling, right? Eating food is still fulfilling. Eating lots of ice cream and cake and sweets, that could be fulfilling, but in the long run, it's not. And that's what we're finding out about self-esteem. It's the same thing. It's no different when we are telling people who are, no matter what they are, right? I'm going to have to use the example of obese. I'm just going to have to use the example of obese. If we are accepting our unhealthy bodies as being okay, on the surface, that might help us feel better, but in the end, it's not. And as we were talking in the Bookless classroom, our physical lives mirror our mental lives and our spiritual lives or emotional lives as well. Our physical lives mirror that. So if we are saying it's okay to be, fill in the blank, it's okay to be mean to other people. We're saying it's okay to be mean to other people. If we're saying it's okay or it's smart to lie, to get out of things, you're smart to get away with things. If we're saying those kinds of things, we are living for the short-term reward. And that's not where we get rewards. We have to get our rewards in the long term. We can't get our rewards in the short term. Otherwise, we end up, those are destructive ways. So we could see the consequences of all of these things. And they make intuitive sense. What I mean by that is that they feel right. Intuitively, it makes intuitive sense. It feels right. It feels right that we can't be feeding people self-esteem day and night. It feels right that we can't be doing that. Something's wrong with that. That's what I feel. I can't put my finger on it exactly, but I feel there's something wrong with that. And that's what Martin Seligman was getting at. He was getting at the idea that there is something wrong with feeding people self-esteem when they didn't earn it. All right? So he was focused on the two epidemics. The two epidemics here for, again, his speech to the American Psychological Association. He's telling them, what do we need to work on? We need to work on these epidemics. What are they? The epidemics of depression and the epidemic of violence. We know they're epidemics because we see that they're affecting a large portion of our population here in the United States, and they are rising quickly. Depression is rising quickly, and violence is rising quickly. That's why we know they are epidemics. All right. So let's get to now. I'm saying that there are rewards for it, for boosting your self-esteem. Boost your self-esteem. Boost your self-esteem. Boost your self-esteem. Boost your self-esteem. I'm saying there are rewards to that, right? But in the long run, the consequences are great if we haven't earned it. That's the bottom line to all this. So now we're in the fast lane to finish that part of our story up. Okay. For un momento, I am going to, oh, there's my paperwork right there. Let me let you study this for un momento. I'm going to get my paperwork and I'm going to get my coffee and I'm going to let you look at this. So this is the epidemic of depression. We're going to look at the epidemic of violence, which you haven't really looked at so far. So we've looked at that slide on the epidemic of depression, and we held it there for quite a while when we were together on last Thursday. But we haven't really taken a look at this epidemic of violence. So there's the epidemic of violence, all right? So we're going to talk about both of those things. Now, when I go and get my coffee, I am going to leave it actually on this epidemic of depression because that's where we're coming to, all right? Okay, that took me a little longer than I thought, but I just walk slow and grab my papers. And I make my coffee too, so I guess it wasn't bad. All right, so I have my notes in front of me as well. So the very first thing, so remember, we have got 3 reasons for this epidemic of depression that we're seeing here in the United States. The first reason is this mix-up between the I-we balance, where we used to have a strong we, and now we have a strong I. The second reason is, and I'm going to come back to that. We went into some detail, but I think there's a few other things I want to say about that. The second reason is the self-esteem movement, and in particular, the movement for supporting what we're calling unwarranted, unearned unearned self-esteem. We have self-esteem, but we didn't earn it. All right. And it's important because self-esteem is a resource. It's actually a resource. And when we call something a resource, what that implies is that it can get depleted. We can run out of that resource or run low on that resource. Maybe we don't run out always. I don't know. But we at least can run short in that resource. So we know self-esteem is a resource, which means we can run short in self-esteem. All right? And that makes sense. It makes sense if we're depressed, right? Okay, so unwarranted self-esteem or unearned self-esteem. When we earn it, we get a resource. When we don't earn it, we don't have that resource, or that resource is depleted, right? It's running low if we don't have the resource. So reason number one for the epidemic in self-esteem, the I-we imbalance. Reason number two, this unwarranted self-esteem movement, the self-esteem movement, which basically took place in the 80s, started in the 80s, and it started with the research that we were doing on self-esteem. That's how this movement really got started. The psychologist said, you need it, and so we were teaching everybody to give it to their kids. Don't call them fat. Good idea. Good idea. I have seen vicious mothers. I've seen vicious mothers criticize their daughters about their looks and their weight. And you know what happens? All things get worse. Because a mother who, it's very clear from a psychological perspective that a mother who makes that child believe that your love is, we call it contingent on, or I give you love if you, that's a contingency. If when, that's a contingency. If when. If you lose weight, I will love you. Or if then, not if when. If then. If you lose weight, then I will love you. All right. If then statements. So what's the problem with some parent-child relationships is that the relationship is contingent on something. If you do this, then I will love you. And a child cannot believe that they have to do something for your love, or that they have to look a special way for your love, or that they have to act a special way for your love. This is very, very important because it's what we are also taught as an example as a Christian example. And we have to talk about these Christian things at this time, especially if we have a good example. A Christian example is in the life of Jesus, right? And so we have to demonstrate in particular with our kids that we will love them no matter what. That we will love them no matter what. That we understand that when they make bad choices, that it actually is, at least in part, a reflection on me as a parent, right? And that's why we get embarrassed. That's the reason why we don't want to admit, right? All right, so, and that really is sort of the bottom line. That's sort of the bottom line is will you still accept me when I screw up? What if I screw up really bad? Now, it doesn't mean, though, you're not getting punished. And that's this whole self-esteem movement. This is sort of, if you can kind of think about it, because this is a critical thinking class, where would this come from? Where would this come from? Why would we have it, right? This is coming from, again, school shootings and affluent meaning rich areas, rich white areas where people should have everything, right? Where they should have everything. Why is this occurring? So, self-esteem movement, reason number 2. And reason number 3, which remember is not at the top of that right-hand column, that right-hand column where it says costs and benefits, is victimology. We have this idea that we have promoted victimology. Okay, all right, so let's go back again and take a look at, and then I'm going to do it really briefly because I think that there might be a couple things that I missed there with the I-we balance. So let's just go back. So the I-we balance is really an I-we imbalance. Part of this we have to understand is cultural. Part of this is part of Western culture. In Western culture, we do emphasize and focus on the individual. It just is the way we do things. We see ourselves as being independent from one another. And when we make our way, we are unique. Now, it's interesting because when you are in middle school or high school, or that age bracket, right? So your teens, lower teens, and then you're starting to get out of it as you get older. We don't want to stand out. We don't want to be unique. I was thinking of the word freaks. We don't want to be feeling like we're freaks, right? Like we don't belong at younger ages. And if we're taught, it's okay to not belong. It's okay to not belong. You know what? Sometimes it's not okay. Sometimes it's not okay to not. Sometimes it is okay to not belong. And this is where, Bookless Classroom, we have to use our discernment, our ability to judge. Is this a situation that calls for focus on me? Focus on my talents, focus on what I want to work on. Is this a time for me to be focused on another person and what they're doing, on the environment? What am I supposed to be? Because discernment, the ability to judge. So judging what we know and judging what is in the situation. So it really is this balance, right? It really is this nice little balance between outside and inside. Outside, we have to pay attention to inside. We have to pay attention to our insides. That is introspection, paying attention to what's going on inside, right? Are we feeling angry? Are we feeling sad? Are we feeling sad but happy? Because we could have that kind of combination too, right? So we do have to focus on the I. It's not saying that we don't focus on the I. It's saying there is a balance. And again, I started with this can be cultural as well. Western culture, which we're considered here in the United States as Western culture, which has its roots in Romans and Greeks, Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, that kind of theory is make me be the best I can do. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's a Western thought. Getting to the top of that pyramid is not talking about people at all. It's talking about me. Who gets self-actualized? Me, right? Big I, small we, small community. We don't talk to our neighbors any longer. Do we even know our neighbors' names? I know some of my neighbors' names, but not most of them. Most of them I do not know. And even the neighbors' names that I do know, it's not for good reasons. Isn't that usually the truth? If we know, is that the truth? If we know somebody's names, it's not really for, what they wrote. It's not for that they signed the Declaration of Independence or wrote the Constitution. We don't know who did that. We know who did what. Who's the Instagram person. That's not a community, right? That's not a community. And remember, when we have a large we, this buffers against my mistakes. Why? I started to say earlier about emphasizing our surname, our last name, for the kinds of things that we are doing. What are we known for, right? And then that is what builds our self-esteem. Are we a family who's a family of criminals, liars? Are we a family of heroes? Are we a family of writers? Are we a religious family? Are we hypocrites? We know the family, don't we? We know the family. And some of us say, yeah, that's my family, but that's not me. That's a big I. That's when some of us want to break away from the family. There's nothing wrong with that. We have to recognize, as scientists, what are we doing? We're describing is what we're doing. We're describing. So sometimes a big I is good. But we have to recognize that we don't have a big we any longer. We just don't. If we don't know our neighbors' names, or if we only know people's names for our own, because it's for negative reasons or our own selfish reasons, right? If we only know our neighbors' names for that, that certainly is not a big we, all right? So why is there depression? Why is there depression? Because of this I-we imbalance, number one. Number two, this building of unwarranted self-esteem, right? So we've said this, we've started on this already. Now, I always gave my students this example about unwarranted self-esteem to kind of get it. And that is my two boys and Legos, right? They both loved Legos, but my older son was really good at putting it together. And my younger son knew that, right? So my younger son would always just give him the Lego sets to put together for him because they wanted to play with them, is what they wanted to do. They wanted to play with them. But my older son enjoyed building them. My younger son eventually enjoyed building them as well. But it was a lot easier to play with them when he gave his older brother the Lego sets to build. Right, then they could play with them. They get the Lego sets for Christmas. My younger son would give it to my older son to put together. My older son would put all the Lego sets together, and then they could play. Makes sense. Totally makes sense, right? But in this process, who got the self-esteem? My older son. Why? Because he had the skill. That's the reason why. My older son got the self-esteem because he built the skill. Here's now where we're getting to mastery. What does it take to build self-esteem? Mastery is what it takes. What does it take to master something? 10,000 hours. To be a master like this, or like, to be a master to put together this book, yeah. Or history books that I have over there that I've been referencing, or in my philosophy class to write these kind of books, that takes 10,000 hours, right? So what does it take to be a master? 10,000 hours. Did it take my son 10,000 hours to figure out how to build a Lego set? Well, not my oldest son. But it could have my younger son. I'll tell you why. Not 10,000 hours, obviously, because he let his brother do it all the time. That's the reason why. He was invested in playing with the Legos, but he wasn't invested in building the Legos. So even though he had lots of Lego experience, he wasn't an expert at putting the Lego sets together. He was an expert at playing. And I'll tell you something, he was an expert at playing because he had the imagination. So, for him to, to be able to really entertain himself for his whole life so far, his whole life. So good things, right? So both of those things are, both of those things can build self-esteem in different ways, right? So, but my older son was really earning the self-esteem as far as Legos go. Now, let's say, okay, so now we're having this Lego building contest, let's say, all right, between my older son, who's 3.5 years older than my younger son, all right? So now we're having this Lego building whatever. And so, and let's say that my younger son is, so they're at their 4-year mark, so my younger son is 6, and my older son, because they're 3.5 years apart, so sometimes they're 4 years apart, right? Whatever. So let's say my younger son is 6 and my older son is 10, all right? And they're building their Lego projects now. And they're like, Mom, look at my Lego project. And there is my 10-year-old's Lego project here, right? And here is my 6-year-old Lego project, who also hasn't been building Lego projects, you know, like he should, because he let his older brother, all right, build them. And so Mom's looking at it. So Mom, take a look at these Lego projects. And Mom's looking at them. And Mom says to the 6-year-old, your Lego, although it says dropped frames, 0 drop frames. I don't know. It's doing the wheel of death there. All right. Oh, there. Oh, and okay. So we've got the 2 Lego sets next to one another. We did the wheel of death there, so I'm going to try and pick up where we should. So we got the 2 Lego sets next to one another, the 6-year-old and the 10-year-olds next to one another. And you're like, 6-year-old, it is just as good as your older brothers, right? Your older siblings. It's just as good. Now that 6-year-old knows it's not. So what do you suppose that 6-year-old is learning at that moment? The 6-year-old knows my younger son knew he could not build a Lego set like my older son could. He just couldn't, right? Using their own, obviously they could build the same thing if they have the instructions. I'm talking about their own Lego sets using their own imagination. My younger son could not build, and he knows it. And looking at it, everybody with any common sense would know that that 6-year-old Lego set is not as good as a 10-year-old's Lego set. So what do you suppose my 6-year-old learned? If I said that, if I said it's just as good as your older brothers, what do you think my 6-year-old learned? He learned it's okay to lie. That adults lie. We learn that a lot, right? We learn that a lot. My 6-year-old learned that adults lie. And by the way, that you are supposed to lie to make me feel better. That's what the 6-year-old learned. The 6-year-old didn't learn that in order to feel better, you have to make something or do something that's better. What the 6-year-old learned is that people are supposed to lie to you to make you feel better. The 6-year-old learned that it's everybody else's responsibility to make you feel better. And isn't that exactly where we're at? You're supposed to use the right pronouns to make me feel better. You're supposed to use the right words to make me feel better. It's not going to make you feel better. It's just not, because you have to earn feeling better. You have to put the work into feeling better. It's a psychologically sound idea, and we understand it when we think about sports. And if everybody in T-ball gets a ribbon, then nobody stands out. Nobody is special. So nobody has to work, but everybody has to lie. Nobody has to work, but what we've learned is everybody has to lie. And that's the self-esteem movement. All right, let's take a closer look at each one of those points there then. And remember, this is good stuff that we're learning as psychologists. So there are some really good psychologists doing a lot of really great work in the area of building true human spirit. Okay, so this self-esteem movement, first of all, what occurred here is that we were building unearned, or I called it unwarranted self-esteem. Unwarranted just means that it is self-esteem that has not been earned. It also neglects then real strengths. If everybody, as I said, if everybody gets a ribbon and t-ball, then who is the really great player, right? And so it neglects the really great player. And what's the really great player going to do if they don't get rewarded for their really hard work? Think about that, of course. I've got here, it has a causal relationship with violence. Now, those are scientific terms. A scientific term that we know at very young ages, at your age, you likely can learn it, is that association is not causation. A relationship between two things does not mean that one caused another. We could have a relationship. I have a relationship with this cup right now, and that I'm drinking this coffee here. But it doesn't mean that I caused the cup. I caused the coffee, right? I could have caused the cup. I could have caused the coffee. I could have not caused the coffee, right? But there's still a relationship here. It's my coffee and I'm drinking it. There's a relationship. A lot of times we think because there's a relationship, one caused the other. For example, watching too much violence on TV causes people to be violent. All right? Now we know there's a relationship between violence and television watching. But we don't know if it's a causal relationship. Actually, we do now. We actually do have we have evidence for a causal relationship. But in the beginning, we can't assume that. We can't assume that watching TV causes people to be more violent. It can be that more violent people watch more violent TV shows. Right? And that's true too. And that's true too. So, which one causes which? Does aggression cause us to watch more violent TV? Or does watching violent TV cause us to be more aggressive? So what we're saying here with self-esteem is that, as we said in Thursday's class, what we found out is that everything is related to self-esteem. And those were the words I used. I used the word related to, okay? Associated with is what we mean. There's a relationship there. There's an association there between TV violence and, I'm thinking, did I say self-esteem there, and did I use the example of self-esteem? Somebody, can you get me the script? Can you read that back to me, please? Did I talk about self-esteem? Yes, I was. So I used the word association, and I was saying low self-esteem. Does low self-esteem cause teen pregnancy? Does low self-esteem cause low grades? Or do low grades cause low self-esteem? Does teen pregnancy cause low self-esteem? So this is the question, critical thinking class, this is critical thinking class, that we want to know. We want to know what causes low self-esteem. Or actually, in this case, what's the relationship between self-esteem and violence? Does violence cause low self-esteem, or does low self-esteem cause violence? And what we find is that individuals who have, that there's a causal relationship between self-esteem and violence. But it's a very interesting causal relationship. Very interesting. We're going to keep talking about what this relationship is. All right? So there's a causal relationship between self-esteem and violence. But does low self-esteem cause violence, or does violence cause low self-esteem? Okay? And what we actually found out is it's a special kind of self-esteem. It's actually high self-esteem that causes violence, believe it or not. I want you to sit on that for a minute while I take a sip of coffee. It is high self-esteem that causes violence. Sit on that for a minute. How do you suppose that is? High self-esteem causes violence. How do you suppose that is? Now, we were talking about different measures of self-esteem. Let me show you the measure of self-esteem because I have it now. Here's a measure of self-esteem. Okay, so let me open up my copy because I want you to keep seeing the picture, so I'm not going to blow it up. You'll have to get closer to your screen to see the questions because I like my picture. All right, so here we've got, I feel that I am a person of worth at least on equal basis with others. And here we've got, one is strongly agree, all the way, number 2, agree, number 3, disagree, and 4, strongly disagree. All right, so that's our scale. We're supposed to circle the number that best represents your response. I feel that I am a person of worth at least on an equal basis with others. Number 2, I feel that I have a number of good qualities. Number 3, all in all, I am inclined to think that I am a failure. Number 4, I am able to do things as well as most other people. Number 5, I feel I do not have much to be proud of. I take a positive attitude towards myself. On the whole, I am satisfied with myself. I wish I could have more respect for myself. I certainly feel useless at times. At times, I think I am no good at all. Okay, so that is Rosenberg's self-esteem scale. I might have called it Beck's depression. I might have called it Beck's. I'm not sure if I did. It's Rosenberg's self-esteem scale. And there's a shortened version. Here's a shortened version of it as well. So only 6 questions. So there's a 10 question. These have been in use since 1965. So this is adopted from the 1965 Rosenberg self-esteem scale. The shortened version was adopted from that. Okay. All right. And when you're taking that, you can see there that there are asterisks there and there's information there. No, there's not. There's no information there, but there is information on the shorter one that those that they tell you which numbers have to be reverse scored. So this is a real survey that you could use in order to determine your level of self-esteem. It's a reliable survey, and it's a valid survey. It's been in use since 1965 and has been reliably showing that this is measuring self-esteem. All right. So what does that mean? It means people who have high scores on these scales exhibit behaviors that are that show me they have high self-esteem. They're not running around crying, depressed, anxious. These people are showing me that they're confident. They have good relationships. They make good choices. They have good grades. They have goals. Their behavior is showing me that their score is correct, right? Or their behaviors may be showing low self-esteem. Their behaviors are showing me then that they should have a low score on this scale, and they do. Now there's this whole problem then. I want you to think about it for a little bit, all right? So there's this whole problem that we have now with this causal relationship between violence and self-esteem, with high self-esteem causing violence. Can you see that? Can you see that? Can you identify, if you close your eyes and think about it, can you identify people who probably think a lot of themselves, and are violent. So here's a really good sort of problem, dilemma in science, is that we've got this great measure of self-esteem, and now we're showing something that seems like it doesn't make sense. Haven't you always thought low self-esteem that, let me put it this way, which I've said in our last class. Haven't you always thought that bullies have low self-esteem? Haven't you always thought that bullies have low self-esteem? This is critical thinking. We cannot just erase away the complexity of humanity, of the human being, for convenience of an explanation, right? So can we not see how it always made sense to everybody? Bullies have low self-esteem. Why do they bully people? To boost up their self-esteem, of course. So bullies have low self-esteem. Yet we're finding bullies have high self-esteem. And remember what I said. We did the experience sampling method. The experience sampling method is what we used. So we would, throughout the day, we would find out, is this person, and now I can't remember if I said it in this class or if I came to it in another class. I might have said it in the philosophical class. And so we'll talk about it now. So, hasn't it always made sense that bullies have this low self-esteem, right? It makes sense to me. Like I said, I have this feeling that bullies should have this low self-esteem. But remember, in that experience sampling, I check people throughout the day. And the great example that I won't necessarily get into, but I'll talk about, because I think I talked about it in detail in the other class, is moms. Throughout the day, I would be asking moms, what are you doing and how do you feel? To see what they're doing, and with what they're doing, if it is associated with how they're feeling. But a lot of times the moms throughout the day were doing something they didn't like, cleaning up after their child, right? Changing diapers, breaking up fights. Throughout the day, the mom is doing things that she doesn't like doing, but what's her reward? So I can take a look at a long list of things that the mom is doing. What are you doing right now and how do you feel right now? Changing diapers, yuck. What are you doing right now and how do you feel right now? Breaking up a fight between my kids, yuck. What are you doing and how do you feel right now? Cleaning up one of my sick children, yuck. But overall, what? So these are the areas where we are trying to really put some critical thinking, especially if we want to understand ourselves so we don't fall into depression. What is it right now that we've learned very easily? We could say, what pulls us out of depression? Master something, and that will pull you out of depression. It's the reason why I keep saying time and time again, we need to be engaged. We need to be engaged in life. And in being engaged in life, that is when we master things. All right? Okay. All right. So that is our self-esteem there with our causal. There's a causal relationship in self-esteem, but it is high self-esteem causes more violence. Again, close your eyes. Think about people who are violent. Do they have high or low? How would they score on that? How would they score on that self-esteem test? Think about people who are bullies. How would they score on the self-esteem survey? How would a bully say, I feel that I'm a person of worth, at least on an equal basis with others? How would a bully answer that? I feel that I have a number of good qualities. How would a bully answer that? All in all, I am inclined to think that I am a failure. How would a bully answer that? I am able to do things as well as most other people. How would a bully answer that? Okay, and then there are directions for reverse scoring on the second one, but you follow the same thing if you do the first one. And what that is it tells you if you answered no, is that no? No, true on items 1, 4, and 6, as well as false on items 2, then you tend to have a high score. Oh, no, it doesn't tell you that. Never mind. I'm sorry about that. What kind of ding-dong statement is that? You have to reverse score these, all right? And so the ones that are an asterisk, you have to reverse score them. So you have 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? All right, so with the ones that have an asterisk, if you have a 1, you put a 4, and if you have a 2, you have a 3. If you have a 3, you have a 2, you have a 4, you have a 1. All right, that's reverse scoring. Then you add it all up to figure out. Go back over that if you don't understand. It's really not a hard concept to understand, but some people don't get it right away. Once you get it, I always draw it out, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. And then for those that are asterisked, I just put the new score there, right? So if I had a 2, I put a 3. If I had a 4, I put a 1. Okay, so that's what I do for those that are asterisk. I put that out 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I literally change the numbers. Okay, I hope that makes sense to you. You can find it online. Oh, what am I doing here? Okay, all right, so we understand now what a causal relationship is, and the critical thinking component here is how is it that bullies actually score high on the self-esteem scales? It goes to show you that there are all of these kinds of gray areas that are being picked up with the survey. Nevertheless, we do see people on these surveys that score high on them also exhibiting behaviors that show high self-esteem. They like themselves, they like others, they get along, those kinds of things. Okay. And then the last thing is that it created victims. The self-esteem movement created victims, which brings us to the column all the way to the right, which are the costs and benefits of being a victim. Why would we become a victim? Well, first of all, we would become a victim because there are benefits to being a victim. One of the benefits is that many of us identify with the underdog. We identify with the underdog, the person who doesn't have as much, the person who just doesn't have everything, right? We want the poor person who's down. We want to win. We want the person who's down and out to win. We want a Rocky Balboa story, right? The guy, Italian, who lived in Italian, who was Italian, lived in the Bronx. No, Philadelphia. Sorry about that. Woo! They were like, what are you saying? The Bronx? No, Philadelphia, right? And worked in whatever factory, mine thing, whatever welding thing. I don't know what he was doing. I can't remember. But we want the story of the underdog to win out. And so we like those stories, right? And so that is one of the reasons why we have created this concept of victimology. We identify with the underdogs. Number 2, it does actually raise our levels of self-esteem. Can you believe that? It actually does raise self-esteem. Of course it does. Remember what I was saying. You could choose to solve a problem in a destructive way by bullying other people, or you could resolve it in a constructive way by mastering something that you don't know. Will you get rewards, some rewards, by bullying? Of course there are rewards, otherwise people would never do it. There are some rewards. What are those rewards? Those are an increase in self-esteem. When we play the victim, it really does increase our self-esteem. Why? Because we usually have somebody who's willing to put their arm around us and go, don't feel so bad, it's okay. Well, that person called me a him and I'm a her, right? Well, don't feel so bad. There are some worse things that could happen, right? creating these mountains out of molehills. Why? Because we have this epidemic of victimology. We've created a license to be a victim all over the place. So this idea again of victimology. Number 3 there. It perverts the traditional wages of failure. If everybody gets what does this mean? It like screws with the traditional wages of failure. It skews our idea of what failure is. It skews our idea of what failure is. And that makes me feel better. I'm not such a failure. If you are not allowed to talk about my weight, talk about how much candy I eat, talk about how I don't take care of my teeth, if you're never allowed to talk about those things because it hurts my self-esteem, then how will you know when you failed? And isn't that important? Isn't that important? How could we master anything if we don't know when we failed? Right? All right, and then the last one there is sometimes it's correct. Sometimes we're victims because life was really horrible to us. Sometimes I'm a victim because I'm a victim. Right? Sometimes people are like, well, it's only paranoia if nobody's doing it. But if somebody's chasing you, it's not paranoid, right? All right. So sometimes it's true. Sometimes people are down and out. Sometimes the system has neglected some people of color and not other people. I don't know why this isn't working right. Right? Sometimes people have been treated unfairly. Sometimes women have to stand up for their rights because other people, other genders won't. The other gender won't, right? I mean, no matter how you want to describe it, when you're talking about who's suppressing women, it would be the other major gender, right? Okay, so sometimes it is true. Sometimes children grow up to abuse because they have been abused. Sometimes people grow up and feel like a failure because they never won a game. They never played an instrument because they just don't have the same capacity as most other people. Sometimes people are victims and sometimes it's true, right? Okay, we will come back with the costs. Right? Yep. We are done for today with the critical thinking classroom. We will come back with the costs and then the second epidemic, which is the epidemic of violence. Remember, this isn't a college course. We aren't here. We don't have to rush through any of this. So I'm just happy with the pace I'm happy. I'm just happy with the pace. I'm happy that I'm here teaching you this is the critical thinking classroom. This is Dr. Annette Feravich. I am the teacher, and this is the classroom. Thanks for joining me.